From incidents that devastated remote villages to an incredibly close call on the world's deadliest mountain, here are the 8 most destructive avalanches in history. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to They Will Kill You. Hit the like button and request any topics you'd like to learn about in the comments section below. Number 8. Kohistan Avalanche. This avalanche hit the village of Bagaro Serai in Pakistan on February the 17th, 2010. In the days leading up to the disaster, the village had been experiencing heavy snowstorms. When the avalanche struck, several houses were completely obliterated and the roads leading up to the village were blocked. This, along with additional landslides, severely hindered rescue efforts. Volunteers and the police had to hike all night to get to the site of the avalanche. It was difficult for them to coordinate their efforts since the mountain terrain interfered with radio reception. At its lowest estimates, the death toll was placed at 102 people, but many of the villages were declared missing, so the actual number is much higher. Number 7. Mitsumata Avalanche. This is one of the worst avalanches in the history of Japan. On January the 9th, 1918, a massive wall of snow and ice hit the small village of Mitsumata. 34 homes were completely destroyed and around 158 people lost their lives as the avalanche swept through the village. Even though incidents of such proportions haven't taken place in the area since, some experts are concerned. The 1918 incident had been caused by heavy snowfall. Similar conditions occurred on the slopes 10 more times between 1918 and 1971. This means the village is still vulnerable to another devastating avalanche if measures aren't put in place. Some measures would be to install snow fences on the mountainside and the frequent practice of avalanche-related drills. Number 6. Wellington Avalanche. The Wellington Avalanche is the worst natural disaster of its kind to ever take place in the United States. Towards the end of winter 1910, the railroad community of Wellington faced a terrible blizzard. Every day about a foot of snow would fall on the hour. People were blocked inside and trains were trapped in the depot. On February the 28th, the snowy weather was replaced by a warm and humid wind. A violent thunderstorm hit Windy Mountain and a lightning strike caused a large slab of snow to break loose. Forest fires had recently ravaged the slopes above the town, which meant there wasn't much to hold back the avalanche. It struck the town's railroad depot, where most of the passengers and crew were asleep in their trains. The force of the impact sent the trains almost 150 feet downhill, so people were pulled from the entangled wreckage, but adverse weather conditions meant that rescue efforts had to be delayed. It wasn't until the middle of summer that all the bodies were recovered. 96 passengers, train employees, and railroad workers were killed. 3 days after the Wellington disaster, another avalanche hit the region near British Columbia and claimed the lives of 63 railroad workers who were clearing the tracks at the time. Number 5. Winter of Terror. In the winter of 1950 to 1951, atypical weather conditions in the Alps led to an unprecedented number of avalanches. The intersection of an Atlantic warm front with a polar cold front caused high precipitation and snow deposits several feet in height. A series of 649 avalanches claimed the lives of at least 265 people and destroyed hundreds of buildings. Austria and Switzerland saw the worst loss of life, with 40,000 people trapped under the snow. Andermatt, a Swiss town in the Adula Alps, was struck by 6 avalanches in less than an hour, which resulted in 13 deaths. Economically important forests were leveled in both countries, and countless farm animals were killed. Number 4. Afghanistan Avalanche. In the past decade, Afghanistan has been ravaged by these natural disasters. In 2010, a series of avalanches were triggered by a freak storm in the Hindu Kush mountains. They struck the area close to the SALANG tunnel, north of Kabul. Both sides of the tunnel were affected and thousands of people were trapped in their vehicles. Aside from cold and hunger, those inside the poorly ventilated tunnel also faced the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Troops, bulldozers, and helicopters were mobilized by the Afghan National Army. The NATO International Security Assistance Force also offered its support with 4 Chinook helicopters. It also used helicopters to drop food and supplies to those trapped in their vehicles. The SALANG avalanches left an estimated death toll of 172 people. On March 4, 2012, at least 3 avalanches hit the Badakhshan province. A small village of several hundred people was in the path of one of the avalanches. The village was so remote that there weren't any roads to it, and people in the area generally traveled on foot or horseback. In the aftermath of the avalanche, its inhabitants received some help from neighboring villages, but the first rescue workers only arrived after 2 days. 56 deaths were confirmed. An additional 145 were presumed dead, and hundreds of homes were wiped out. At least 300 people were killed in Afghanistan's Panjshir province in 2015. Over the course of 4 days in February, 40 avalanches hit the region. The acting governor of Panjshir claimed that these had been the worst avalanches to ever hit the country, while President ASHRAF GHANI called on the world to assist with the crisis. Aside from international support, 1,000 Afghani troops were also deployed. The 2015 avalanches have been caused by heavy snowfall. It's a common cause for these natural disasters. An avalanche occurs when the snowfall overcomes the cohesion of the snow, which may also be affected by a rise in temperature. Number 3. White Friday. In 1916, a series of avalanches, remembered collectively as White Friday, claimed the lives of many World War I troops stationed in the Alps. By the middle of December 1916, heavy snowfall and a sudden thaw in the mountains created the optimum conditions for avalanches. Austro-Hungarian military barracks were built around 11,000 feet above sea level on the Grand Post summit of Mount Marmolada. The location offered protection from Italian attacks, but the wooden barracks were powerless against the natural disaster that followed. On December 13th, about 35 million cubic feet of ice and snow plunged from the mountain directly onto the barracks. Hundreds of soldiers were buried alive as the weight of the snow crushed the wooden structures. Later that night, another avalanche struck and overturned military barracks on the Italian side. Around 10,000 soldiers from both sides were killed in the aftermath, and many of the bodies were never recovered. Number 2. HUASCARAN Avalanches. Mount HUASCARAN in Peru is a beautiful natural site with a dark history. 2 avalanches that came down from the mountain caused unparalleled destruction and the highest death toll of such natural disasters. The first avalanche occurred on January 10th, 1962, and was caused by a natural crack in a glacier. 6 million tons of ice and snow hurtled down the mountain at an unusual speed, covering 9.5 miles in just a few minutes. People who'd initially heard the crack believed that they had more time to evacuate. The avalanche wrought havoc on several towns and villages. The towns of Huarascucho and Ranrahaka were lost beneath 40 feet of debris and snow. The avalanche stopped upon reaching a river, damming it and causing extensive flooding in the area. At least 4,000 people and thousands of farm animals died as a result of the avalanche. Additionally, properties and crops worth millions of dollars were completely destroyed. Less than 10 years later, another, more destructive avalanche ravaged the area once again. On May 31st, 1970, the Ancash earthquake, which reached the maximum magnitude on the Mercalli scale, caused a substantial part of the mountain's north side to collapse. Almost 3 billion cubic feet of mud, ice, and rock came barreling towards the towns of Yungay and Ranrahaka. The towns were buried under earth, ice, and debris. The level of destruction that the avalanche unleashed, particularly when considering loss of human life, is unmatched. more than 20,000 people were killed, making this the single deadliest avalanche in history. To this day, the earthquake and the avalanche it triggered are remembered as the worst natural disasters to ever hit Peru. Number 1. Annapurna Avalanche. Mount Annapurna in north-central Nepal is widely considered to be the world's deadliest mountain. In October 2014, at least 43 people were killed by avalanches and snowstorms in what's regarded as Nepal's worst trekking disaster. Annapurna has a fatality to summit ratio of 32%, meaning that 1 in 3 climbers attempting to reach the summit will most likely die on the mountain. It's quite clear that the ruthless Annapurna allows almost no room for error, which is what makes the events of April the 18th, 2012 even more impressive. On that day, Turkish photographer Tunç Fundik captured the exact moment an avalanche was hurtling towards a group of climbers. The group consisted of a Mexican couple and 2 Sherpas who were crossing a dangerous section of the mountain. As Fundik took the picture, he believed that the climbers had been killed by the rushing mass of ice and snow. Amazingly, they managed to find shelter under an overhang and survived the avalanche unscathed. Despite their close call with the mountain's fury, the group continued their ascent.